Right, so I think we are all here and it's that time. So, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming today. Before we start, I just have to let you know that Rose is taking a break from the Barocci group. She wants a sabbatical because she's getting married, as some of you might know, this summer. So she was finding it a bit too much. So you're stuck with me for the next few months, and then after the summer, God knows what will happen. So we'll get there when we get there. So, yes, today we're going to talk about vanitas in painting. Some of you might be already familiar with the term, others might not be, but we will explain that in a minute. But today for our prayer, I thought, because yesterday was the feast of Blessed Giovanni da Fiesole, also known as Fra Angelico, who is the patron saint of painters and of artists in general, I thought we would pray to him before we start. So, Father, do you want to?
Just about read it from here, yes. Is a test.
He's
Father,
not.
and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Eternal Father, through the incarnation and transfiguration of your Son, you joined the beauty of heaven to fallen and wounded creation. Then, in your providence, you raised up the painter Fra Angelico to imitate Christ by making this beauty known to men. Through his intercession, send your Holy Spirit to renew the earth and bring it to the beauty of your perfection. Grant us the grace to manifest this splendour to our brothers and sisters and come to share with Fra Angelico the sight of your face. We ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God for ever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you very much, Father. So, what are vanitas painting? So, it's an artistic genre that basically centers on the futility of mundane things, the brevity of life, and the certainty of death. So all very cheerful, and is what I thought that this would be a good summary of it. Stop, reflect, prepare. I got this from the COVID regulations. Be alert, protect, and it's just like a sort of had the same idea. So is the need of a change of ways, the reflection and repentance in order to prepare your soul for a good death and the eternal life. And that's what we are doing this Lent, so that's why I thought this would be an appropriate topic, even if it's not very, very cheerful. So it's considered at least at the start, it's considered a subgenre of still life paintings, because it's basically objects, all of which have a symbolic meaning. And sometimes also human figures, but the human figure is always secondary to the topic of the painting, and it's always the same idea. You will see like the symbols repeat again and again. It's an allegory or allegorical genre, because it's this idea of a moralizing narrative. We saw a little bit this in the last talk when we talked about allegories at the end. So what we're going to see today is basically all allegory. So is the allegory and the symbols that conform them. So I think I was talking about this also last time, that allegory and symbol are two things that are very similar, if you like, but they're not the same. So the allegory is the story or the narrative that's being represented, and the symbolic meaning of each of the objects is what builds that narrative. We've already established what that narrative is, this message, like the brevity of life, the certainty of death, and the message will always be the same. Sometimes it's incorporated into other genres, like religious paintings, everyday life, or what is also called genre painting, even in portraits. But today what we're going to see is mostly the still life type. I've only brought you a few examples because this topic, even though it's quite specific, is very broad as well. There's loads of examples. And the name Vanitas comes from a verse from Ecclesiastes. So vanitas, vanitatum et omnia vanitas, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So we're going to see first some of the origins of this, or the precedents of this. So the images of death with moral or philosophical meaning have existed since the prehistory, but mostly in Roman art. Since before Christ, we find this type of painting, and one of the topics is what's called the memento mori. So the memento mori comes from a statement that Roman generals had to hear repeatedly during the triumphal procession after a victory. So the full phrase would be respice poste hominem te esse memento mori. So look behind, remember that you are mortal, remember death, so that you don't think that you're a god, basically, when you're receiving all that cheering from the crowds. And there was a slave dedicated to this particular task, riding in the same biga than the general. And I just couldn't resist bringing this scene from Quo Vadis, because I think it's really good, because it's a film that is from the 50s. Some of the things are a bit anachronistic, but actually that detail is very well done. So, and then this is an example from Pompeii. It's a mosaic. So you have the skull, which obviously represents death, is balancing on the wheel of fortune here at the bottom. And which can make the rich, represented by the purple cloth, into the poor, represented by this animal skin here, or the poor into rich. So it's that idea that death makes everyone equal, which we will see later on in Vanitas painting during the peak of its popularity. And the thread at the top symbolizes the fragility of life, and the butterfly, if you see it here between the wheel and the skull, those are the wings of the butterfly. That's the soul that flies after death. And then there was another thing related to this memento mori. There was something called the larvae conviviales, and it was a type of memento mori, basically. They were some skeleton figurines, either extant, like the one that you see here on the right, or as a relief on vases or on cups, so the extant ones, you would give them to guests at a banquet. It's like, oh, welcome to my house, here's a skeleton. Or you would have them in cups or in jars. Would you have this on your table? I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, it's quite cute. It's very smiley skeleton, but I don't think I would have that. And the idea conveyed by this memento mori was mostly the concept of another well-known Latin phrase, which is the carpe diem. So basically, make the most of your life before it ends. Make the most of the day. But this... It could be taken in the hedonistic sense of just like enjoy whilst you can, but also there was a moral meaning behind it. Is don't waste your life away, basically. And then if we move forward in time, the concept of the memento mori was taken into Christianity, and it was especially important during the Middle Ages. If you think of the deathly horrors that were assolating Europe in the 14th century, so you think of the famines, the 100 Years' War in France, and most of all the Black Death, all this sort of contributed to an atmosphere of constant insecurity and the omnipresent possibility of a sudden and painful death. And this, on one hand, increased the desire for penance, the religious desire for penance. But on the other hand, it provoked a desire for amusement while still possible, which takes us back to that carpe diem. So you might have heard of the La Danse Macabre. And this is a literary, artistic, theatrical genre that was created specifically end of 14th century, beginning of 15th century in France, and from there it spread across Europe. And it basically is a didactic dialogue in the form of a poem, to remind people of the inevitability of death and to advise them to be prepared at all times. And it's usually either the dead, as a collective, the dead, or a personification of death that summons people from different walks of life. And it's usually the same, in the different versions of the La Danse Macabre, it's usually the same stereotypes of people. It's always, I think I brought here this one, I think that's the Pope, and that's the Emperor, and that's the parish priest, and that's the peasant, so that's us. So, yeah. So the effect was both frivolous and terrifying, so it combined both desires of penance and amusement, and it was also easy to understand for the illiterate, because they would, even if they couldn't read the words, they would look at the drawings and they would know what they were looking at. So the first example in painting is a mural painting at the Holy Innocents Cemetery in Paris. This is from 1424-25, and that mural has been lost, but these prints here were taken from that mural, and that's how we preserve it, basically. These ones were compiled by someone called Guy Marchand in 1486. And because the poems were formed of sort of short verse dialogues between death and its victims, they could be and were represented as plays. And this was both a thing for peasants and for the noble people. So you would have them in village squares, but also at court masques, which would be costume dance events. And I've read that this could be the origins, or partly the origins of dressing up for Halloween. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but it definitely has a link. And it has had a long-lasting legacy, not only in literature and in fine arts, but also in film. Again, I just couldn't resist. I'm really sorry, I'm obsessed with film. This is still from the film The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman. If you haven't seen this film, I thoroughly recommend it. It's very weird, but it's absolutely brilliant. And also in traditions, so what you have in the picture on the right is the Danza de la Mort. It's in the town of Verges in Catalonia, in Spain. And this is part of the Maundy Thursday procession. So here is a phrase in Catalan that says lo temps és breu, which means time is short. And in the scythe of this person, the personification of death, is the Latin phrase nemini parco, which means I don't pardon anyone. So if you ever go, on Monday, Thursday, you will be able to see this in person. I've never been, but I can imagine it's a little bit scary. So, apart from La Danse Macabre, we find the image of the skull in all the history of art, but since the Middle Ages especially, on the walls of churches. And then in the Renaissance and in the Baroque period is when the Vanitas develops, and in the Baroque is where it has its maximum expression. Apart from on the walls of churches, it's very common to find the skull on the exterior of triptychs, like this one, for example, by van der Weyden, is you see Christ with Our Lady and St. John the Evangelist, that St. John the Baptist on the left and St. Mary Magdalene on the right. But then if you close the triptych, you have this skull here on the left with a broken piece of, now I've forgotten the word, brick, that's the word, a broken brick. And the wheat is the symbol of the family that this was painted for. So it's the same idea, is the memento mori, is the need of repentance. And the inscription on the cross on the right wing of the triptych says I'm not going to read all this in Latin. It says, "O death, how bitter is the memory of you for a man who has peace in his possessions, for a man who is at rest, and whose ways are prosperous in all things, and who is still capable of receiving food." So again, is that idea of the inevitability of death, and that it can come whenever, even when it's not, you wouldn't expect it, because you're at the peak of your life and don't have nothing to worry about. Another precedent that can be found in the many representations of Saint Jerome in his study since the Middle Ages. This is one of the most famous ones by Albrecht Dürer. There's loads of this type of iconography, and it's usually Saint Jerome in his study with the books on one side and the skull on the other, sort of pondering whether intellectual knowledge is, at the end of the day, is good, but at the end of the day is nothing compared to the idea that you're going to die. And obviously we have the religious significance of the cross, so it's not only, in this case, he's not only thinking, this is all vanity because I'm going to die. If I compare this intellectual knowledge to the knowledge of the love of God, then this knowledge means nothing. So that's represented here on the books. And is that quill? Is that the right word? Yes, thank you. In other versions, there's also a candle that's either going to be completely consumed or that has already been consumed, and that's also a symbol of life that ends. And here there's also one of his most famous engravings by the same artist, Dürer, is the Night, Death and the Devil. And you see, again, it's the same ideas. You see the knight who's, at the peak of his military career. He's successful. I'm not sure if he's handsome. He isn't very handsome, but anyway. So his horse is very, very lavish. And he encounters Death, who is riding this really old horse. The skull is just right there at the bottom left. And then here, this weird-looking animal or creature is supposed to be the devil. So again, the Death is holding a sand clock, so just telling him, well, you've been triumphant, you're going to war, and you might die in war. So where is all this glory going to go? And then the skull is also a common element in later representations of saints, especially during the Counter-Reformation, when the images of saints were more abundant than before, as a symbol of penitence. So, and especially two saints, St. Francis of Assisi and St. Mary Magdalene. It's not a Vanitas, but it has connections with it. And then I brought you this very famous painting by Hans Holbein that is the Ambassadors, that is at the National Gallery in London. It's still a Renaissance painting. It's still not exactly a Vanitas, but it is quite close to the Vanitas of the Baroque period. The two men that we see here, they're obviously very rich. We can see from their clothes. They're very important people. They're dressed in their finest. And they're leaning on a table on which a still life is arranged. You see all sorts of symbolic objects there. You see the musical instruments with some music, the globe that represents earthly power, all this, another globe there, and the scientific instruments, so all that knowledge, all that power of the world. But the element that's hidden in the picture and in the painting, and it was actually not discovered until the 20th century, is an anamorphosis of a skull. An anamorphosis is just an object that is painted or included in a painting in a way that we can't perceive it with the naked eye. You need a mirror, or in this case, you would need something that's curved. So, for example, the back of a spoon. If you put it like not against the painting, don't do that. Just a few centimeters away from the painting, and you will see the image of the skull reflected there. So that's how it would look like. This is obviously with a computer. That's how it would look like. I've no clue how painters did this. I don't know.
If you stand at a certain angle to it.
Yes.
Yes, if you stand.
So how did they miss it?
Well, like I think they probably thought that it was a weird thing, but yeah, I don't know, because I think it's in that on the right. If you stand at the right of the painting next to it and you look at it, then you see it. So I don't know how nobody realized. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know, because there's definitely something there. Like, even if you don't know what it is, it's like, what is that? So yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Irene, I have a
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
Why did they do that?
Why?
just-
Well, it's a sort of hidden meaning of the painting. So when you look at it for the first time, it's like, oh, you're just like, it's a double portrait basically of these two people with their names. I can't remember their names now, but you know, they were real people, and it's just a double portrait, and they're represented with all the, you know, the power that they had and the importance, but the hidden message would be, but all this is going to go to nothing. So yeah, it's just hidden messages that sometimes painters did like to. I have no idea if this was an idea of Hans Holbein or like a joke. I don't know, but yeah, it's the idea of hiding a message in that way. And then the last thing has to do with the Vanitas. It is the books of emblems. So these books were collections of what they called emblems, which is images with an allegorical meaning. That image, like you see, the pictura icon imago symbolon, they had different names. And that image is explained in a Latin, usually Latin title, and then further explained in a text that connects the image with the title. And this originated in Italy from a collection of poems by someone called Andrea Altiato. And later they were illustrated and published in Germany as the Emblematum Liber in 1531. So we're already in the Renaissance, and they were very much copied and new versions created across Europe. And they have this moralizing message. So for example, in this image you see the myth of Icarus falling and drowning in the sea because he flew too close to the sun. And the title for this is In Astrologos. So this is meant to be for astrologers who need to be very careful in their predictions, or they can fall, like Icarus fell. So that's just an example of an emblem. So all of these images would have an influence in what would be then the Vanitas in the Baroque, because all the symbolic meanings of objects would come from many of these images, from these books. So the Vanitas, as a genre, started in the Netherlands, and is as a subgenre of still lifes. Still lifes were very popular in the Netherlands, and it went from being a type of still life to an independent genre around 1550, and it sort of lasted. Its popularity was quite big during about 100 years, and then it slowly started to decline. And why in the Netherlands? Well, because there were two important elements. One was the moralizing message, which was it linked very well with the rigid principles of the Calvinist religion. And on the other hand, you have the level of detail, especially in the craniums, but also in the other objects, which also linked to the scientific interest that was beginning to develop there as well. It was particularly important in Leiden. I don't know how to pronounce it, Leiden or Leiden. I don't know. Leiden. So the Leiden school, because it was an important Calvinist intellectual and religious center. And the founder, if you like, of Vanitas is considered to be the painter David Bailey. This drawing of his here is considered like the very first Vanitas or Baroque Vanitas. he was very influenced by Rembrandt, and you see the skull, obviously the symbol of death, and then you see the sand clock. This is going to be very, very popular. It's going to be one of the objects that you're going to see again and again. We also have the smoking pipe, that also is a symbol for the brevity of life, as together with the sand clock. And the roll of parchment here has the inscription "Quis evadet," which means "who escapes." So that's was considered the first Vanitas. So before we move on to big examples of Vanitas, I just wanted to show you in this table a summary of the main objects that we can find in them and what they represent. So I'm not going to comment on all of them, but the human activities or human qualities are presented as ephemeral and as sort of insubstantial, and their pursuit is in vain when we find them alongside with other objects that represent death, the passage of time and the brevity of life. And then sometimes, it's not very often that this happens, but sometimes there are some elements that represent the resurrection. So, for example, the wheat or the bay leaves wreath. I don't know, I wasn't sure if it was bay leaf wreath or is it a laurel wreath? I don't know. In Spanish it's laurel, so I'm not sure. But basically the wreath that you would see also in Roman times, like the sort of conqueror or victor wreath. But that object can also symbolize the vanity of fame. So you have to be careful and how to interpret it. It will depend on the context of the painting. And then usually, not in all of them, but in quite a few of them, there's Latin phrases, like for example the memento mori that we've seen, the tempus fugit, time flies, ubi sunt, where are they? So meaning where are all these people that were so important in life and now they're basically rotting there. Or sic transit gloria mundis, thus passes the glory of this world. So sometimes they're also in vernacular language, but more normally in Latin. So we're back with David Bailey. This is his most famous painting, and we have a massive array of symbols there on the table. So anyone wants to tell me what can you see there? Skull, yes.
The candle.
We have the candle, yes.
Is there a statuette or something?
Yes, there's a statue here. There's a bust here.
There's a pipe.
There is a pipe, yes. There is a sun clock as well, just over on the right.
Is it some kind of beads or?
This, yes, it's pearls. It's a necklace, pearl necklace.
What's hanging on the wall there?
This?
An unfinished, yes.
I think that's a painter's palette, but it doesn't have any paint on it.
Yeah.
And then
there's also that parchment roll or whatever it is. Can I see?
here,
My eyes are not too good, but I can see it.
there. So there is the phrase that gives the name to the genre. So that's the verse from the Ecclesiastes, Vanitas, vanitatum et omnia vanitas. What's very interesting about this painting is that the painter is representing himself as a young man, but he's holding a portrait of himself at the age at which he painted this painting. And here on the wall we have another, it's either a drawing or a print of himself at a sort of middle-aged man. So we have the three ages of man going on here. And then I'm not sure about the bearded man. He looks like a hermit, but I don't know. He's definitely not him. So I don't know who he would be. He doesn't have any attributes of a saint or anything. And then we have another portrait of a young lady there, and potentially the same lady in the bust, but she's much older. Don't know if maybe his wife. So again, it's sort of reflecting on how beauty fades away. We're not young anymore. The jewelry, the flowers also allude to beauty, to pleasure, to riches. There's some money here as well. The cup or the glass that's sort of on the table and is empty also alludes to that, so emptiness of worldly pleasure. And what fun thing that you will see in other paintings is the the soap bubbles. So that again alludes to the fragility of human life. You will see it later in another one. This is another one from the same area of Leiden, but a different painter. And this one is more monochromatic, and it is very, very striking. The ray of light that's like just going on the skull, and then again we have the empty shell is also a symbol of vanities, a symbol of the emptiness of, like, as a shell is just a shell; it has nothing in it. The sword is symbol of power. The book is symbol of the intellectual knowledge. The instruments symbols of pleasure. So again, it's just repeating the symbols. And I told you about the soap bubbles because there's this topic specifically. There's the homobuia, or man as fragile as a soap bubble. So it's almost a subgenre of the Vanitas. There are several paintings that are dedicated just to this. So you see the little boy there is looking very fleshy, very healthy, but next to him there's the skull with the bones. If you look at the angle of the skull, you see the level of detail of it is absolutely incredible. And we go back to that scientific knowledge. They wanted to be as exact as possible in the level of detail. And we have the sun clock on the right. So again, passage of time. Then Flanders is another region which will have lots of examples of this. So Flanders, the historic region of Flanders is now spread between Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. So it was Netherlandish artists who brought the Vanitas to this region. So it has a very strong Netherlandish influence, but also an influence of their own school, the Flemish school, and especially Rubens. So the compositions are more Baroque, more just busy with things, more exuberant, more ostentatious, if you want. And in this example, again, we see the objects in an apparent chaos. That's another feature of the Vanitas. The chaos is just apparent. The objects are there in that particular place for reasons. But yeah, what we see is just this array of things on top of each other. The skull here is a little bit hidden. Does anyone see the skull here? There is a skull. John is looking very intently.
Yeah. Why is there a mitre there?
A what? A mitre?
Mitre.
Yes, well, that represents the religious power and authority. You have to think as well, like this is the Netherlands, this is Flanders, is so more Protestant sort of branch. They're trying to, say, all the Catholic Church, like...
It's saying that the church authority is transient and...
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
But more than that is the power, is the worldly power of the church and the riches of the church that they're saying to be transcended. But yeah, right. Nobody sees the skull. It's a bit hidden, and probably you're a bit too far.
Is it by the underneath that?
No, it's near the top.
Right.
Is it on top of next to the
top
full
of the
turban? Like?
Yes,
Yes.
it's just at the top there. Next to the turbans, and is crowned with a wreath. So this, for example, I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but in this case, I would say the wreath is alluding to the vanity of triumph and of worldly glory, rather than being a symbol of the resurrection. And there's also a sarcophagus at the back here, and with a sort of urn on top. And the inscription on the sarcophagus, just there, it says Vanitati es, which is for sacrificium, so the sacrifice of vanity. This is a very interesting one because it has a trompe-l'œil, so it's a painting within a painting. So you see, like this, like the canvas that's just been painted on, and in this corner, the top right corner is coming off. There's a self-portrait of the artist at the very top, and then we have the usual elements in the actual painting. We have just the candle that's about to be put out. We have the soap bubbles. We have a gun there. It's a bit violent. But then we have on a sort of shelf that is almost as if we could reach it. We have some of the brushes and the palette from which the paint is dripping because it's been left just vertical like that. So it's quite a fun one. And then in France, the genre was introduced from Flanders. So we see the chain, how this develops from the Netherlands and is slowly spreading across Europe. So that was the main influence in France, the Flemish influence. And there is a particular subgenre of vanitas that develops in France, which is the five senses. And in this one, you see the hearing is represented by the music, as opposed to in others you see musical instruments. In this, it's just the music at the bottom. You see the mirror on the left, next to that's a granite, is that the right word? I don't know how you call it. Pomegranate, that's the one, pomegranate. So it's reflecting the pomegranate. The pomegranate is, since ancient Rome as well, is a symbol of sensuality as well. So it's sort of, again, it's just alluding to all the vanity of the senses. The money or the board games, you see the playing cards on the bottom right with some coins there, that's the touch, the flowers on the vase, the smell, and the food, obviously, the taste. And this here with the ruined architecture, I'm not sure if it's a mirror that's reflecting what's outside of the room or if it's a painting. I would say it looks more like a mirror. So there would be a window on the left that we can't see, that's providing the light for this scene. And outside the room, there's an architecture that's reflecting on the mirror. And the ruined architecture is what gives this the character of the vanitas, because what it's saying is all this is vanity. In Germany, it comes more from the Netherlands rather than Flanders, and also from Italy, depending on the artist. This is very much depending on the artist. And this one is not called Vanitas or anything like that. It's called the Cabinet of Curiosities. So you might have heard that term before. Is this sort of little room or little even cupboards that people would have in the house with rare objects, exotic objects, sometimes precious objects, but it didn't have to be precious necessarily. It's just rare, exotic that they would show to their guests, and is the very sort of great grandparent of museums today. So, but in this one we see again an array of different precious objects, artistic objects. We see some, I don't know what that is. That's seashells there. I don't know what that is. Just precious jewelry, and we have the clock as well. So again, it's not a sand clock, but it's a clock, and clock always alludes to the passage of time. But we have the skull. So that's what makes these a vanitas again. And then I've brought you this because it's not only paintings that represent the vanitas, but we've already seen drawings, we've seen prints as well, like the Dürer one, but also in sculpture. And this was a very common topic, like the small child with the skull. In Spain, it was more normal to have a baby Jesus with the skull, but that would have a different meaning. That would have more the meaning of the skull being the skull of Adam and Christ as the Redeemer, and also like just the fact that Christ is going to sacrifice himself for us. So that had a different meaning, which we will see also later. So we see again the same symbols. We see the sun clock. We see the wreath on his head. In this case, maybe would be more a symbol of the resurrection, because the wreath is on his head rather than on the head of the skull. So I was saying this one is more a symbol of the resurrection, but you have also the torch that's upside down. So it's obviously going to be put out, so extinguished. So that is also a symbol of the life that's fading away. In Italy, there were two artistic currents opposed to each other. So on one hand, we had the naturalism, more realistic, coming from Caravaggio mainly, And on the other hand, we would have the classicism, which is more idealized, more looking towards the masters of the Renaissance. But some artists combined the two, and I brought you this one because Salvator Rosa was quite an eccentric artist with a very personal style. I apologize because the quality of the image is not great. It looks better on the computer, but the saturation of the color is bigger on the TV screen and it's a bit dark. But you see was this woman with a child on her lap, and the child is writing on a piece of parchment that he is going to give to death, which is represented by as a winged skeleton. So what he is writing on the piece of parchment is conceptio culpa nasci pena, labor vita necesse mori. So conception is a sin, birth is pain, life is work, death is a necessity. Yay! And then we see another two children. This one here has a torch. So again, that's the symbol of the life that's fading away. And this one is making soap bubbles, which we've seen before. And I've also brought you a sculpture example. This is absolutely amazing example of a Vanitas. It's in the tomb of Pope Alexander VII. This is by Bernini. So at the very top you have the statue of the Pope, and the photograph is obviously being taken at an angle. But you see this incredible winged skeleton that's like coming almost through the door, and is holding a sand clock. So yeah, this is a very very grand example. And then we get to Spain, my favorite part. So in Spain, this was brought by both Flemish and Netherlandish painters, but soon it acquired a more specific style. It was a little bit, the message was a little bit different. So instead of a more sort of not necessarily religious and even positive vision of morality, more in the line of the carpe diem, of the just seize the moment, is full of religious significance, is inviting to reflection, to penance, to avoid damnation and reach salvation, hopefully. And this is very much linked to the spirit of the Counter-Reformation. It also has very strong links with literature. So if you think, for example, of the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the Treaty of the Vanity of the World, or the famous play that you might have heard of, Life is a Dream by Calderón de la Barca, which we will see influence one of the paintings that we're going to see. And there are two big names in the Spanish Vanitas. So one of them is Juan de Valdés Leal, and two of his most iconic paintings are at the Hospital de la Caridad, so the charity hospital in Seville. They're not frescoes, they're oil on canvas, so they're canvases, but they're absolutely massive and they're stuck to the wall. This one, if I'm not mistaken, this one is right above the door when you get in, and the other one, which we'll see in a second, is right opposite. So you would see that one, and then you would turn around and see this. So they're both quite gruesome. They are a big contrast with the rest of the iconography in the chapel. And the idea was that these two vanitas at the entrance would sort of scare the person coming in, would invite them to reflect on their sins, and then thinking, well, where do I get mercy? And then you would have 6 big paintings by Murillo on both sides of the chapel running towards the altar, which represented the corporal works of mercy, culminating on the rear doors where you would have a sculpture with the entombment of Christ, which will be the last work of mercy, which is bury the dead. So it's basically saying you have to repent. And what do you do to attain salvation, to get to salvation? Works of mercy. So this one is called Inictu Oculi. So you see, the inscription is just right at the top. The death is just pointing at it, and it's basically in the twinkling of an eye. So it's the classic Vanitas, all the usual objects. We have the meter again. So here, even in a Catholic country, it's basically telling bishops and telling even the Pope, don't get attached to the things of the world and to worldly powers. We have the books representing the intellectual knowledge. We have the weapons. We have the globe that death is sort of stepping on as the worldly power as well. The death is carrying the scythe and a coffin as well. This, as you see at an angle, is a coffin, and he's putting out the candle, which represents human life. And then this is the other one. It's called Finis Gloriae Mundi, the end of worldly glory. So how the path of earthly glory leads to the grave. So we see several corpses in different stages of decomposition. This is a relatively fresh corpse here. This is a medium corpse. And this is a very, very, very dead corpse. At the back is almost a skeleton again. And there's some skulls at the back. We see an owl. An owl is in the Christian iconography is also a sign of the devil, sign of evil, as opposed to a sign of wisdom, which was in Greece and Rome. So the one at the front is a bishop, if I'm not mistaken. And if you look at this painting, not on an image, but on the real thing, the amount of bugs and maggots is absolutely disgusting, is revolting. So this was to convey a very clear message that sort of was ingrained in your brain. And in the middle we see the scales. So we see the choice between damnation and salvation. On the left we see symbols that represent the 7 deadly sins, and it says ni más, not more. So not more is needed to be condemned. And on the other hand, on the other side of the scales, we have the Sacred Heart of Jesus, we have the Bible, we have a crucifix, we have all symbols of prayer and of religion, and it says ni menos, so not less. So not less than all of that the church is offering you is required for salvation. And the scales are held by the hand of Christ, because you see the wound. But the scales are balanced. So what needs to be done in order to tip the scales towards the right side are the works of mercy that Murillo painted on the walls of the church. So that ties in with the whole iconography of the chapel. These two paintings, or rather their facsimiles, are in the Spanish gallery at Bishop Auckland. So if hopefully maybe we go together, which is a possibility maybe later in the year, or if you go on your own, make sure to go at the top floor. They have these two paintings at eye level as well, because if you go to Seville, I've been to the chapel and I've seen these paintings in live, but the chapel is quite dark and they're also quite high, so you can't really see the details. But at the Spanish Gallery in Bishop Auckland, they've done an incredible job doing the facsimile, and that's how I saw the maggots. I hadn't seen the maggots before, and I was there with Sue and Simon, and I was like, oh gosh, I hadn't seen that before. It's just awful. And the other big name is Antonio de Pereda, and this is probably his most famous painting. This is the Night's Dream. This is the painting I mentioned that might have been inspired by the play Life is a Dream by Calderón de la Barca, which is one of the most famous playwrights in Spain from this period, from the 17th century. So it represents a contemporary gentleman. We can see he's quite rich and powerful from his clothes and from the objects that are on the table. And the angel is showing him the picture of the sun with a bow and arrow. It's very small, but it's right at the center there. And with the inscription that says, Eterna pungit cito volat et occidit, eternally hurts, swiftly flies and kills. So again, death can come at any time, and you need to be vigilant. And the objects on the table represent once more earthly power, glory, pleasure, and they're all next to the skulls, which represent death, the clock again. And I wasn't sure if there was a candle. No, there is no candle. There's just the skulls and the clock. That's enough. And yeah, and that's those links to the play. And I thought this one was quite interesting and quite fun, let's say. The painter, it was painted in Spain, but the painter was probably of Flemish origin. And it's Christ is the tree of life. Christ is about to ring the bell to warn the people at the top of the tree who are like banqueting and being merry and everything. There's some flirting going on as well there. And they are actually an allegory for the 7 deadly sins. And Christ is there like with a very worried face on saying, guys! Whilst the death is like just chopping the tree down. So, and the inscription at the top, so you see that this is half of it on the left and half on the right. It says, mira que te has de morir, mira que no sabes cuándo, mira que te mira Dios, mira que te está mirando. Which means, look, you have to die. Look, you don't know when. Look, God is watching you. Look, He is watching you. So, yeah. And then, like I said, about this was between 1550 and 1650. This was the peak of the popularity of the Vanitas. Then in the 18th century, it starts to slowly decline. First with the Rococo style, it's more mundane, more cheerful. And then with the neoclassic style in the second half of the century, it's more sober, more austere, and also it's related to the Enlightenment. So it's the triumph of reason over faith and over superstition, which sometimes were taken as the one and the same thing. But there are some examples. It's more of the same in painting. It's basically just the same symbols. It's just like the gentleman like holding the skull as, you know, reflecting on his life and on all that. So I brought you some that I think is more interesting. So in jewelry, between the 16th and the 18th century, the memento mori pendants were quite popular. So it was like a little coffin that could be opened and reveal a skeleton inside. I have no idea who wore that. Like, and it's gold and silver. So, you know, it belongs to a noble person. I just had this image in my head of this lady with a big wig and the dress and the coffin. Like, I don't know. It's weird. I've never seen that before, but it's quite cute. It's cute. Then in the 19th century, I just love this one. All the movements that appeared in rapid succession. You know, you have the Romanticism, you have the Impressionists, you have the Symbolists, the Post-Impressionism that we said it wasn't an artistic movement. No, it's just a term that we used to refer to painters that sort of looked at the Impressionists, but then they did their own thing. So it's not an actual movement. But you have all these artistic currents that are going on one after the other, and they were treating topics that really didn't fit in with the message of the Vanitas. And the only ones that touched the genre a little more were the Romantic painters, a little bit, the Symbolists. And some post-impressionist artists like Van Gogh. So it's a much more personal style. This in particular was a youth painting. So he painted this when he was studying in Amberes, and it was basically a bit of a joke. So I thought that was more fun than more of the same sort of thing. And in the 20th century, again, we have all the avant-garde movements. They come and go one after the other. And like I was saying before, the artists try to avoid what's been done before. Each artist is trying to find new topics or no topic, or reinterpreting all themes in a very personal way. There are other artists that react against this and they want to go back to the old masters and the old themes. There's loads of examples of both of them. But I chose to bring you this one that you might recognize from our Warhol talk, I just thought we will bring our friend Warhol here. As we said, like this, you see the skull, but on the shadow of the skull, you can make out the outline of a baby face. So it's reflecting on in his own way, but he's reflecting on life, on how life is so short that we go from infants to skeletons in a very short period of time. So as I was mentioning to John before, is the two world wars had a big influence over this pessimistic view on life, the disappointment on human nature, and also the theories of Freud would have an influence in this, which would associate in their words, it would associate sex with death, with dreams, and all sorts of mixed up. And as I say in that very, very bad pun, the topic of the Vanitas is very much alive today. And just as an example, I brought you this skull made by Jean Fabre. He made a series of skulls covered in beetle wings. So all these are beetle wings. So, I mean, I very impressed by the work that he did. I'm sorry for the Beatles. But usually these skulls have their mouth open and have dead animals in them. I thought that wouldn't be very nice to finish the talk. So I chose this one, which also ties in a bit better with all that we've been talking about, because it has a big diamond on top of it. And it's sort of the topic of world riches alongside the symbol of death. And that is it. Well, I can tell you what this is, if you like, because you're going to like, oh, what? So that's a mosaic. That's a Roman mosaic. It's a memento mori mosaic from excavations in the convent of San Gregorio in Rome, in the Via Appia. And now it's in the National Museum of the Bath of Diocletian in Rome as well. And there's a Greek motto here that says, "Notis auton," which means know thyself, and it combines that with the image of a skeleton. I have to say it's a bit of a muscly skeleton. I think they just didn't know how to make a skeleton with the tesellas, and probably was quite difficult to make it. So it's reclined on the scythe, and it's sort of conveying that famous warning of the memento mori. But I just thought it was a very, very nice, cheerful, sort of fun image to finish with. So, yes, thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
I was just going to say, it used to be the custom at the papal coronation that the Pope, as he was carried on the Sedia Gestatoria through St. Peter's Square, that he would be met by a Franciscan friar with burning flax, who would say 3 times, "Sit transit gloria mundi."
Yes. Yeah.
That tradition.
Yeah, it's sort of to make sure that you don't forget that your authority, who gave you the authority, and you shouldn't attach to the world power that you will have, because you will have it, but it's not to be attached to it.
Should bring it back.
Yes.
Should. Yeah. Do you have any more questions?
It reminds me of the music, Media Vita, in the midst of life or in death. It also reminds me of that, John Shepherd and all those ones, with those ones about that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it did have an influence in music as well, or in theatre. I mean, yeah.
Well, you had that church on the in Rome on the what's the name of that street?
The whole thing.
Yes, we have all the Franciscan bones.
Oh yeah.
And the odie mihi cras tipi. Today me, tomorrow you.
Tomorrow you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Via Veneto, yes.
The Via Veneto, yeah.
Yes, and all the scenes in the crypt.
That's right.
Yeah.
As they say, there's some, what is it, 5,000 dead Capuchins don't smell as bad as one live one.
Yeah, there's another chapel in Oviedo, I think. I mean, there's more than one, but one of the most famous ones is in the Oviedo Cathedral in Asturias, in the north of Spain, where there's like the Chapel of the Bones, and it's the same idea. It's like the walls and the ceiling, everything is covered in skulls. So it's quite, yeah. Like when you go in there, you're just like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, your candelabra made out of rib cages also.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
I have a
hello.
question. Could you go back to the La Danse Macabre, that page?
Yeah, sure. Where are we? This one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is that doing with the parish priest? Is he giving you a massage or something? It's been
Well,
working for a long time.
if-
What is it doing?
If there were any Star Trek fans here, I would say it's giving the pinch of Mr. Spock that caused villains to just go, but not dead, just like unconscious. Yeah, I don't know why. I think it's meant to just like taking him by the shoulder and saying, "Come here." But it's just the angle of the arm is a little bit strange. They hadn't mastered perspective yet, so they just had to.
Like with the Pope, I can see that he's trying to take the staff.
Yeah. Same to say the staff of and here the sword from the emperor. So yeah, it's quite fun. I will leave on the YouTube video that will hopefully be uploaded this week. I will leave a link to the Spanish Wikipedia article about the Vanitas, because it's actually a featured article. It's one of those that very well researched. The person who did the research, I think, must have been dreaming of skeletons for a very long time, because gosh, so much in there. But even if you don't understand the text very well, but there are loads of examples, and it's like I took the structure from there, basically, like on the countries, country by country, and there's loads of examples for each country, and then from there you can explore more if you're interested. So it's really good. So I'll leave the link there. So yeah.
I think I've figured out how it might have been possible to draw that weird skeleton skull.
Yeah.
If it is through a curved mirror, then what you would get is you would get a skull, and you would put a curved mirror and paint the image that you see.
Yes.
Perhaps.
I just find that like bonkers. Like, how can you actually? But how talented you are to do that? You know, it's like, I know you're obviously drawing what you're seeing, but your brain will try to correct the image. You know, it's just I find it incredible. Like there are other examples of anamorphosis that don't have anything to do with death or anything. I saw there was a painting that the whole painting was an anamorphosis. Like, you don't see anything. It's just like a bunch of colors, like in almost as if it was moving, like spinning really quickly. And then you put basically a circular, like a tube that's all mirror in the center, in the middle, and you see the image on the mirror. And it's just like, how on earth? Like, I know that obviously they were painting, like, maybe like you said, but it's just like, did their brains not like... I don't know. It's just I think it's just incredible how they did it.
They're showing off technical expertise.
Yes, it was mostly that. Yes.
Are there many other paintings that do that?
I'm not sure
That's the only one
how.
I know of.
Yeah, I don't think that many. No, it was sort of a fun thing to do. It was almost like a joke. Like John said, it was basically to show off
You
your.
add a few whatever in terms of your charge.
Yes.
You could double the price of your painting.
Yes. Yeah. Right, so I'll see you on the 19th of March. I think we're due for the next one. I won't reveal the topic yet. So, yeah, not yet. But thank you. Thank you very much.